Hello, Happy New Year. Thank you for clicking on this video. And I'm gonna get straight to the point. It's just a simple click and record. Right now, I have my Notes app open with all the books I've read this year. And we'll definitely talk about some of them, not all of them, but we'll definitely go over a lot because I felt like this was quite an interesting year, mainly because prior to 2024, I did not read a book from cover to cover on my own free will. Like, of course, you had school assignments, and even then, I would just cheese it. So, but this year, I started out with a goal of at least reading one, and that was the first one, which we'll talk about, which is The Creative Act by Rick Rubin. Um, Definitely an interesting book. I thoroughly enjoyed reading it. I felt like it really got me into a headspace where I wanted to do kind of just get started into something of my own, because a lot of times, like, and I feel like this is a normal thing, but I kind of just didn't have hobbies as such, like, you work, you go to work, you come home, and you just kind of scroll mindlessly on TikTok and Instagram and such. Brain rot, and it's kind of soul depleting to me. And this book really, I would love to give it another read this year because I definitely think it put me in the headspace and started me off into a good start. And I started picking up piano again and exploring new things such as journaling, which is another thing I was very proud of this year. Was I was able to, uh, yeah, complete an entire journal this year. Picked up piano again. Tried my dipping my toes in writing. Definitely something more I want to do this year. But I definitely think this book helped me with at least getting in that mindset, and I would love to read it again now that I have a little more experience, like actually have hobbies that I do, and I would love to kind of take it a step further because there's definitely a lot of experiments done in this, a lot of thought experiments for sure, and learning to shift your perspective too. And like that's one thing I really noticed in this book. It was talking about how you have to keep it lively, keep it fresh. And like I think my favorite one was the seed analogy. When you're finding you know, a creative endeavor, you're kind of picking up these seeds. Something may not hit instantly, but you're just collecting them and you allow it to grow and take time. And I really noticed this in one of my favorite artists, Tyler the Creator, where if you go back through his discography and you can kind of see him reference, a song that he hasn't even put out yet, and you hear it in the future, like on "Call Me If You Get Lost," you hear "Sweet" in "Flower Boy" in one of the songs. So it's just like, and it is two very different songs, but you hear it, and it's very interesting, and like I want to start applying that more. But definitely just starting to create. I'd give this a book like an 8 out of 10. I would really suggest anybody who wants to do things with art, do things that is more creative, and give this book a read, and definitely give Tetragrammaton his podcast a listen. He brings on very interesting people, very different people too. So that's the first book I read, and then I followed up with this, a little silly book, Philosophy 101, just because I wanted. It's literally just a crash course on these different ideas, and it goes through all of them. I got a lot of my philosophy stuff, knowledge from YouTube, and I'm like, okay, I don't even actually like read the books. So, and I read a couple of them. I read, yeah, I have meditations um, and Letters from a Stoic by Seneca. And then I also have The Obstacle Away, a lot of Stoicism, but I want to start exploring more into Taoist thinking and start really looking in just maybe some Hegel, things. It's just there's so much out there and so much literature, and also philosophy is not the most fun literature, which brings me to my next one. I read the Communist Manifesto, and that was a slog to read through. And my main approach with that was, a lot of people have these opinions on communism, capitalism, but I don't, I don't want to form an opinion unless like I actually read the text. And because that text is, straight from the 1800s, it's, it kind of has a, you have to be in a certain headspace into reading it, and it can feel is very dated, and but you can still understand the concepts. It was definitely not a great book. It was literally the third book I read this year, so it was not recommended. I wouldn't recommend anybody read that as their like first couple of books. Get into something like easy, but I think it's important to read at least to form your own opinion about it, about at least the theory of communism, and such, because it is a attractive theory for many people. The next book I would say that I read, but a lot of okay. Also, a little context. My job is where I am very lucky enough to be able to wear headphones while I work. So like 8 hours a day, I can really get through a lot of audiobooks, which some people count as that's not reading, whatever. I still read a couple I've still read books, but I was able to use this to my advantage and really get through a lot of literature at the same time. You know, it's still reading, whatever. But I also went through The Art of Seduction. I read this book by Robert Greene, and I think low key anybody who has any kind of relationship, I'm not just talking about like pursuing sexual or romantic relationships, but like genuinely like interpersonal relationships should only really read one chapter from this book. It's its longest chapter for sure. It's called The Anti-Seducer. And if there's anything anybody should get from this book, because it's like a 24-hour listen, and I have the physical copy as well, so it's like 400 pages, I think. Everybody should at least read this specific chapter because there's a lot of information in this book, but this is the do nots. So if you don't want to be unlikable, or at least you want to align yourself with people and really think about what kind of people you are around, what kind of person you are, because like to be honest, that chapter is really about self-reflection in my opinion. I was listening to it and I was just like, wow, I cut off a lot of people. I sometimes am very vulgar and sound very stupid. I say a lot, but this chapter would definitely, I think, benefit everybody who would read it. So I highly recommend at least reading that chapter. I do think the book has a little bit of dated language. Every time they say victim, and they refer like whenever you're pursuing someone, they say victim a lot. So that makes my butthole clench a bit. But other than that, it's I would say a solid book. And on the theme of Robert Greene, next book I read and I think enjoyed even more than the previous book was Mastery. And at least I'm in my 20s. I'm still figuring out exactly what I want to do in life. And I was listening to a podcast by Andrew Huberman and Robert Greene. And low key, Andrew Huberman was like slobbing on his knob about this book, but I think for good reason. It is a very informative book. It talks about, which both of these books do. They give real life accounts and go through their stories, and will retell them, and then they will break down exactly what you're supposed to get from it. So it literally breaks down the subtext after it retells it. So it'll tell a story. Standout here was Wolfgang Mozart, I think. I might have got that wrong, but it was talking about Mozart's story and how he was obsessed with piano, how much he, how he pursued it relentlessly. And, that's it, in Mastery, it was just really talking about finding this, how to find what you're looking for, and then really expanding on what you're finding. So you have to kind of have this unhealthy obsession where you chase this thing so much that you would neglect like food and drink, and you would neglect hygiene to continue to pursue this dream. And like what Mozart was able to, like a lot of the things he was able to create was done within a 10-year period. And he made timeless classics. Cardi's been quiet since Mozart dropped. Anyways, so really good book. I think anybody who is looking for any direction in life could use this book, and at least, there's a lot of inspiration to pull from it. And everything you hear about like productivity can be found in this book. And uh, like the idea where you 10,000 hours, about 7 years of apprenticeship, to at least learn the task, and how you have to learn the rules, learn everything before you can expand on it, before you can even break the rules. You have to learn how it goes. So I 100% give Mastery a recommendation if there's anything. So following that, I read a couple books on kind of like I was very interested in how to talk to people. Uh, I feel like I'm very introverted and wanted to shift my perspective to be more extroverted, or at least feel like I can connect to people more. And this brings me to, I'm gonna group these couple books together. Captivate, uh, uh, What Everybody is Saying, and then, though it's not on this list, but I try to give this a read slash listen every year. How to Win Friends and Influence People. Uh, Basically, Captivate, I would say, is like I would recommend listening to the audiobook of that, because you can actually hear her tone of voice and how like you feel captivated, right? So you can literally hear it, her talking in action. But I do feel like a lot of what she talks about can be found in both What Everybody is Saying and How to Win Friends. In fact, she kind of references How to Win Friends a lot in the book. So I think there's more information to be pulled from How to Win Friends and Influence People. Like it cuts to the point, it gets to the chase. But I think listening to the audiobook is a really good way to get best of both worlds. And then What Everybody is Saying, my roommate was reading this and he gave that recommendation. Really solid book. And it talks about it's about a former FBI agent, and he would analyze body language for suspects. And it's a very good way to like body language is something that's kind of ingrained into us like through evolution, and at least even just from it's the first thing that we understand. It was what we understand about what animals are saying. That's how we communicate with them. It's our first impression of people is through their body language, how they hold themselves and such. So, and it talks about like how and it kind of spotting lying is a very difficult thing, because people are also aware that body language is a tell in lying. So, uh, very solid book. I would definitely read it these three in order of maybe listen to Captivate first, read body language, but get and then I would say read How to Win Friends and Influence People as a summary of kind of both of the ideas. But definitely the body language aspect does not touch on like kind of it does not touch on like talking to people. It really touches on how to read body language, and it is like it's a very difficult it's a difficult thing to do. Like even he was talking about how it it was he would have a lot of misses, during his career, and that was his career. But it's a very good listen. I listened to that book as well. Very good book. Now my favorite book of this year, and it's a really quick read. I suggest this to anybody. So I had a couple of themes during this year, which was kind of spiritual aspects. Obviously I just talked about communication because I wanted to communicate with people better, and I 100% believe the spiritual kind of side started with this book by Richard Bach called Illusions: The Adventures of a Reluctant Messiah. And I kind of have a personal connection to this. A friend recommended it to me. I was telling him how I wasn't really reading fiction much, and I wanted to read more fiction. So he brought this book to me. He brought three of them. The other ones on this list is No Longer Human, which is a good book. Very sad though. So I would say if you are already going through a depressive episode, do not give this book a listen. Maybe read something else or listen to something else. It's very sad. But uh, Jonathan, no, sorry, Illusions was just an incredible listen. And or no, sorry, not listen. This is actually a book I read because he lended it to me, and then I actually just recently bought a copy for myself because it was that good. It just for me it put a lot of kind of confirmation to how I think about religion and spirituality, and especially for me, I grew up Christian, but I would say I'm more agnostic now. It really gave me a different perspective on things, and in like if I could sum it up in a whole, it really just says that your life is in your control, right? And I don't want to say anything about the book because it's really my favorite book of this year. Really great book. I recommend it to everyone, and I recommend its sister book. It's not the same book. It's same theme sort of, but very different. Jonathan Livingston Seagull. Very good book. Both are quick reads. The first one was about 190 pages. Other one is kind of the same, but it has a bunch of pictures of seagulls in it, so it took me 2 hours to read it. Um, yeah, I really recommend these two books to anybody. They're very quick reads. It'll get you thinking, it'll get you wondering, and it'll get you kind of inspired. That you really can do things, and you can read either book in order. Whatever order you'd like, but I really would suggest reading these two books. Um, and then the next book along this theme would be uh, The Untethered Soul. This is those two books were fiction that I just mentioned. This would be a non-fiction book, and this guy is talking about meditation. That's not for everybody, I understand, but he also involves some religious aspects to it. So a lot of uses a lot of yogi and Christian like references within this book, but very insightful. This time I was reading it, it's like all these books. It was kind of the exact right time to read them, and I can't recommend these three books enough to anybody. Um, I felt like it also got me closer to my dad, and we got to talk about these books. And he has this uh, really interesting connection for him personally with illusions. So when my friend recommended that to me, it really made me feel closer to him as well. So that again, I really recommend these books to anybody who would like to read them. I also read a poetry book this year. I was very I wanted to step out my comfort zone. see what else was out there. So I read The Sun and Her Flowers, which is basically about a woman going through grief of a breakup and kind of realize like how much she misses this person, but also realizes how toxic this was and explores her identity, and her relation to her culture and her family, and kind of ends off like it goes through the 5 steps of grief, and it's very also another quick read, but it's very good. It has some pretty cool art. I think the author, Rupi Kaur, if I'm saying that right, I'm so sorry if I'm not, but she uh, not only written the book, but she also drew a lot of the art too. Definitely for a mature audience, but it's very interesting. I was thoroughly happy. Of course, I have a couple books like Atomic Habits. This was like just general self-help books. Just wanted like I mentioned earlier, the obstacle is the way. Just kind of to I still, like I said, I'm figuring things out. So I've explored these books as well. But then we got, oh, I almost forgot, The Power of the Subconscious Mind. Another great book. That's kind of falls within self-help slash spirituality, but I think it's got some really great concepts. It's basically the whole idea of manifestation and how you can use your mind, which I think where your language and how you view yourself is one of the most powerful things you can use. I have a couple of books from my book club, which is basically me and my friends, and we read a book once a month. So my favorite one that we read, and that was, or at least Untethered Soul was probably my favorite one because that was a book club book. But in regards to fiction, was Station 11. So good. Just very good. It's a story about kind of a post apocalyptic world, but it's not really about surviving the post apocalyptic world. It's kind of about living in it. And it does this really neat thing where it interweaves the past and the future, and it just like and it centers around some character. Like they'll reveal something in the past and it's relevant in the future, or vice versa, and it's just like just the way the author just interweaves it all. It's just done so excellently. I don't want to like spoil it for anybody. This is genuinely what like I think my biggest surprise read, because I was not excited to read this book, to be honest. I was like, "Oh, this is gonna suck," but I was thoroughly impressed with how it managed its story, and can't recommend that one enough. Another book I read in the in book club was Escape from Furnace, the first of the series. And this was one that my friend recommended, and low key was also meat writing it a bit, but for a good reason. It was another surprise read. I was I picked up the book and I was like, okay, these chapters are short. Like I'm gonna give it a couple of chapters, see how I like it. And it took me like 4 days to finish the book. Very, very good story. I think the author did a great job really encapsulating you in this world. Only I think critique I noticed is it was overtly written for like a teenage audience. So it was going far enough to where it was like, oh, this is kind of terrifying. This is a little explicit, but it didn't feel like it was like it felt a little half-assed in some places where it wasn't fully committed to being like, yes, this is for mature. This is like a really dark story. I feel like they could have taken it a little bit further. But that's just me. I doesn't affect how much I enjoyed the book, and uh, I would read the next books, but I kind of don't want to. Not out of not enjoying it, it's more out of just wanting to read different books. I'm not really interested in reading a series at this moment. Another book I read, and this is the first book from the book club, was White Knights by Dodorovsky, I think. I hope I'm saying that right. It also just might not be him. But basically tells the story of a hopeless romantic and a bit of a simp. But it's just kind of like it like at first it's written, it's translated from Russian, right? And it's it's kind of difficult to really understand it at first because it is definitely not talking the way, you know, I think English speakers are accustomed to. But I think for me, as soon as the female character was introduced, um, kind of the kind of the epicenter of the story, if you would. It really got interesting. Really good read. And an interesting exploration of a character who like genuinely just has no riz. Like that's the best way I can. That's the best way I can put it. Without kind of diving into spoilers. Uh, yeah, this is pretty much all the books I've read. Oh, last book I read, actually the last book of the year I read was A Short Stay in Hell. And this was a book given to me for Christmas by my sister, a short story. And the idea, and this is from the first chapter, so it is not spoilers, it's literally the whole premise of the book. The idea is that this guy, he dies, he goes to hell, but it's not the traditional hell you would think of. And nevertheless, it is still a hell. It's like it's just interesting how it's kind of another deconstruction of people and people when they meet unexplainable things and and how people treat each other even after death. So, very interesting book. Um, it's technically a horror. People like she was saying how she had like an existential crisis. For me, it was an interesting thought experiment. Like, oh, that's different. But I wouldn't. I don't know. Like, I like it's again not trying to give away any spoilers, but it didn't really feel me. It didn't fill me up with like existential crisis or dread. It really just kind of made me like think that's an interesting story. Maybe it's like I just wasn't really that well connected to the characters, but there is this at least one story between two characters, and I really liked what they were doing, and it was a little sad when you know shit hits the fan, but. Again, no spoilers. I do recommend it though. It's a pretty decent book. Um, one last one last book. I promise. This was a really dense book. It's called The Overstory, and I have a bit mixed feelings about it. On one hand, it was. I think it was mainly because I was listening to it at work. I would probably have to read this book, but it is so dense. So much happens in this book, and you kind of like I think I just did not read it the right way, or at least like listening to it the way I was not the right medium because I think you kind of have to sit with what it's saying and kind of like as you read with it, like read it in small chunks, sit with it, and then come back to it later, because it tells the story and to without spoiling it, the main character I would say is trees, but they're kind of also the background character. It's the main theme, the main character, and it has probably like I think 8 or 9 different characters they tell a story from that interweave together in one way or another. At first, when I was listening to it, I thought it was an anthology, but they came back to these characters. So they kind of just go in these order, and there's certain plot threads where they'll interweave. Some characters will never interact with another character, but their influence still affects the story. And I I really liked all of the characters, and that was what it was very impressive. But it also just like the the theme really hit hard, and I don't know. It's something you really, I think, if you were to pick up this book, you need to read it in small chunks and sit on it and come back to it, because it, at least blowing through it the way I did, pause, was it was, I don't think, the right way to do it, and it kind of leaves me feeling like I have to read it again, which is just something I don't want to do. Because of how dense it is, I think it was just too much. But that's just me personally. But that is also, I think, part of the point of the story is where like trees just basically live so long. Like they're very old and they can literally surpass generations. So like you will experience these characters' entire lives. So I think that's why it was such a dense book, because it just had so much to say. That being said, I read, from reading zero books this like any previous year. This year I read 25 books. Some I did not cover, just because I didn't want to. This video is already long and we'll definitely be having to edit it. If you guys read books this year, this past year, please engage. I'm curious. And if you haven't read any books, I would really suggest picking up a book or two. You might like what you read. If there's any book I would suggest, probably my favorite one was Illusions. Just I think definitely the personal aspect of that book really makes me feel very well connected to it, and I don't know, the messaging, the themes just really hit hard for me, and I would encourage anybody to read it, no matter kind of what you think, or at least just like I think it would be very eye-opening for a lot of people, and at least shifts people's perspectives and gets them to think more. But if that's not your taste, if you want to read something more like story driven, I would definitely say Station 11. I think that was a, like, just again, very surprising, very happy with it. Like, I could not praise this book enough. I do have a couple of books I want to read through this year. I'm already starting on my first one, which is Clara and the Sun, and I have it actually right in front of me right now. But I think I'm procrastinating getting to read. It's definitely a habit you have to get into. But Happy New Year to everybody. I hope that you guys will read more. If you don't read, that's okay. Tell me what you do. All right, that's it. Bye.